The Peters house stood at the end of a quiet suburban street, cloaked in the heavy stillness of night. Outside, the faint drizzle of rain pattered against the windows, and the wind sighed lowly through the branches of the maple tree out front. Inside, the lights were warm and welcoming, but beneath that glow lurked something Samara could not yet sense: a silent, waiting presence. Mr. and Mrs. Peter were rushing to get ready. The couple had been invited to an important dinner gathering with friends and had no choice but to call in their usual babysitter. Samara was reliable, good with children, and had worked for them before, but tonight felt different. As the Peters hurriedly gave her instructions, bedtime at 9:30, snacks in the fridge, call if anything happens, Samara noticed that Mrs. Peters' voice was slightly shaky, her eyes darting to the dark corners of the house, as though checking for something unseen. Trying to brush off the odd feeling, she smiled, assuring them she had everything under control. Mr. Peter chuckled, ruffling his son's hair before stepping out the door. "Be good, boys. We'll be home late." Their laughter faded as the door closed, leaving Samara alone with the children and the muffled sound of the rain. The evening began innocently enough. Tommy and Ryan were playful but cooperative. They giggled while eating their sandwiches, splashed milk on the table, and begged Samara for one more story after dinner. By the time she tucked them under their blankets, both were yawning, rubbing their sleepy eyes. Their small voices whispered, "Good night, Samara," before drifting off. She switched on the hallway night light and softly closed their bedroom door, leaving only the faint glow seeping through the crack. At 10:30, the house was silent. Too silent. Samara padded down the stairs and sank into the couch, relieved that the boys were easy tonight. She turned on the television, letting the static hum of a sitcom fill the empty rooms. For a while, she allowed herself to relax. But as the minutes ticked by, the stillness began to feel heavier, as though the house were listening to every breath. Her eyes drifted toward the far corner of the living room and froze. There, sitting on a small chair, was a clown doll. Its painted grin was grotesque, lips smeared into an unnatural smile. The glass eyes glimmered under the flickering light of the TV, catching every movement she made. Her skin prickled as a chill swept over her. She didn't recall ever seeing it before. The Peters had mentioned nothing about it. Why would anyone leave something so eerie in the living room where the children could see it? She tried to laugh at herself. "It's just a toy. Don't be ridiculous." But the longer she stared, the more unsettling it became. Its head seemed tilted just slightly to one side, as though it were curiously watching her. She looked away quickly, fixing her eyes on the television, but the feeling didn't leave. Minutes passed. The sitcom's laugh track sounded distant and warped, as though coming from far away. Her ears picked up something else beneath it, the faintest sound of breathing. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then it grew clearer, slow, heavy, labored, like someone standing just behind her. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She muted the television. The laughter cut off, leaving only silence. The breathing was gone too. She sat frozen, listening, her eyes darting to every corner of the room. Nothing. Swallowing hard, She reached for the remote and turned the TV volume back up. The laughter track resumed, but it no longer comforted her. Instead, it seemed mocking, cruel. She tried to shake the unease, shifting on the couch, but she could feel it, eyes burning into the back of her skull. Her gaze slid back toward the corner. The doll had not moved, but she could swear its grin was wider now. Samara's chest tightened, panic rising. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "It's just a stupid doll." But the oppressive weight of being watched pressed harder, suffocating her. Finally, she could no longer bear it. She stood, trembling, and crossed the room. Her hands shook as she grabbed the doll. Its stiff body was cold, the porcelain face unnervingly smooth. Without looking directly into its eyes, she carried it into the hallway and shoved it into a closet, slamming the door shut. Leaning against the wall, she took a deep breath. The house felt lighter already. See? That's all it was. Just nerves. She returned to the sofa, relief flooding her as she sank back into the cushions. The TV flickered. The rain tapped steadily against the window. For the first time that night, she began to relax. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something in the reflection of the television screen. There was her own silhouette sitting on the couch, and just behind her, in the armchair across the room, was a second silhouette. Someone, or something, was sitting there. Her body went rigid. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head. The armchair was empty. The TV hissed with static for a moment before the picture returned, but Samara's heart would not stop racing. Somewhere in the quiet house, she thought she heard it again. That sound, that faint, raspy breathing. And she realized with horror that it wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from right behind her.
The living room light flickered once, as though something had brushed past the bulb. Samara clutched the edge of the sofa, her body stiff, her breathing shallow. She dared not turn around again, though every nerve in her body screamed that something or someone was standing just inches away from her. The breathing grew louder, not the quiet sigh of a child or the subtle rhythm of her own lungs, but deep, heavy, rasping inhalations. The sound filled the room, curling into her ears, pressing against her chest like invisible hands. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would wake the children upstairs. Summoning every ounce of courage, she snapped her head around. No one was there. The armchair was empty. The carpet was undisturbed. The hallway beyond was still and dark. For a moment, she sat frozen, waiting. The only sounds now were the faint patter of rain against the windows and the low hum of the TV. Slowly, she forced a shaky laugh. "You're losing it, Samara," she whispered under her breath. "Just tired, that's all." But her eyes drifted back toward the hallway, to the closet where she had shoved the clown doll. The door was still shut. But was it? In the dim light, it looked like the door had shifted, open by an inch. She swallowed hard. "No, I closed it. I know I closed it." Her phone sat on the coffee table. For a moment, she considered calling the Peters, telling them something felt wrong, but she didn't want to seem foolish. Babysitters weren't supposed to scare themselves with shadows and toys. She had to keep it together. To calm herself, Samara turned the volume up on the television, the chatter of voices filling the silence. She leaned back against the sofa, trying to relax. Minutes passed. Slowly, her breathing steadied. And then the TV flickered again. The screen distorted, lines of static cutting across the picture until the sitcom laugh track warped into a horrible crackling noise. For just a second, the image seemed to shift, something pale, something grimming, before it returned to normal. Her skin crawled. The air in the room grew colder, her breath misted faintly in the glow of the screen. She pulled her sweater tighter, but the chill seemed to come from inside the walls, seeping into her bones. And then she heard it again. That breathing. Louder this time, closer. It was no longer behind her. It was everywhere, echoing through the house, seeping from the walls, the floorboards, the air itself. Each inhale rattled wet and harsh, followed by a long, rattling exhale that made the hairs on her arms rise. Samara gripped the sofa tightly. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop it, stop it, stop it." She stood suddenly, her legs trembling beneath her, and stumbled toward the hallway. She had to prove to herself the doll was still locked away. Her hand reached for the closet knob, but she froze before touching it. From inside the closet came the faintest sound. Tap, 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 like porcelain fingers tapping against the wood. Her stomach lurched, every instinct screamed for her to run. She stumbled backward, knocking into the hallway table, sending a lamp crashing to the floor. The noise was deafening in the silence, but the tapping stopped. And then came a giggle. High-pitched, childlike, but distorted, warped, as though multiple voices overlapped. It seeped through the closet door, echoing down the hallway. Samara's breath hitched. She bolted back into the living room, slamming the door shut and locking it. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone. She had to call Mrs. Peter. She had to. The phone buzzed in her hand. An incoming call. Her heart stuttered when she saw the caller ID. Unknown number. She shouldn't answer. Every part of her screamed not to answer, but her thumb moved on its own, sliding the screen. "Hello?" Her voice was a cracked whisper. Silence. Then faintly, a hiss of static, followed by the sound of breathing. She clamped a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Who is this?" she whispered. A pause. Then in a low, gravelly voice that seemed to come from right behind her, the words, "Don't look away." The line went dead. Her body shook uncontrollably. She dropped the phone onto the sofa, backing into the corner of the room, her eyes darting to every shadow. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think. And then, slowly, her gaze was drawn to the television. The picture had frozen, no sitcom now, just the faint glow of static, and in the flicker of the snow she saw a reflection that wasn't her own. A clown's painted face staring back at her from inside the screen. She screamed, stumbling backward. The sound seemed to echo unnaturally, swallowed by the walls. The television hissed louder, almost like a laugh. From upstairs, one of the boys suddenly cried out, a short, terrified scream, cut off by silence. Samara froze. Her blood turned to ice. The children. She spun toward the stairs, her heart hammering in her chest. The air was thick, suffocating, and every step up the staircase heavier than the last. At the top, the hallway light flickered violently, throwing shadows that stretched too long across the walls. The children's bedroom door creaked open by itself. From within came the soft sound of breathing. Not one person's, not two, but many. A chorus of wet, heavy breaths rising and falling together. Samara's trembling hand reached for the doorframe. She pushed the door open wider. Inside the room was dark. The nightlight glowed faintly in the corner, illuminating the two small beds. Empty. The boys were gone, and sitting neatly between their pillows was the clown doll. its glassy eyes fixed on her, its grin wider than ever.
Samara's throat went dry as she stared into the children's bedroom. The beds were neatly made, the pillows untouched, as if Tommy and Ryan had never been there at all. But she knew they had. She had tucked them in, kissed their foreheads, and watched their eyes flutter closed. Now the only thing occupying the space between their beds was that doll. Its painted smile gleamed in the dim nightlight, stretching unnaturally wide. The clown's glass eyes seemed to pulse with a faint, reflective light, and Samara felt pinned in place beneath its stare. For a moment, she thought she saw its chest rise and fall as though it were breathing. Her stomach churned. A wave of nausea washed over her. She staggered backwards into the hallway, gripping the wall for support. Her mind screamed at her to grab the children, to run. But there were no children to grab. Just the doll. And then, her phone rang. The sound shattered the silence, echoing through the house like a scream. She fumbled for it with trembling hands, her breath hitching as she glanced at the glowing screen. It was Mrs. Peter. Relief surged through her. She swiped the call. "Mrs. Peter? Something's wrong. The boys..." She cut herself off, her voice breaking. "I put them to bed, but now they're gone. Mrs. Peter, they're gone. I put them to bed, but now... And your doll, I had to move your clown doll into another room. I'm sorry, it was making me uncomfortable. But now it's..." There was a long pause. Too long. Finally, Mrs. Peters spoke again, her tone slow and deliberate. "Samara, what clown doll? We don't have any clown doll." Her blood froze. The air thickened around her, suffocating. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She glanced back into the boys' room. The doll was no longer between the pillows. The line went quiet. A faint crackle of static hissed through the phone speaker. Then, mixed within the static, came something else. Giggling. High-pitched, childlike giggles. Dozens of them, layered over each other, warping into a distorted chorus. Samara's scream caught in her throat. She dropped the phone. It clattered against the hardwood floor, the screen flickering as the laughter continued from the tiny speaker. She kicked it away, backing toward the staircase, but the laughter grew louder, swelling, echoing around her until it seemed the whole house was filled with it. "Stop!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked, lost beneath the sickly chorus. "Stop, please!" And then, silence. Her own breathing sounded thunderous in her ears. Sweat trickled down her spine. She pressed a hand against her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. The silence didn't last. From downstairs, the living room television came on by itself. At first, it was just static. Then, faintly, a voice emerged. "Samara." She froze. Her knees buckled. The voice was deep, guttural, yet mocking, like a grown man imitating a child's sing-song tone. "Samara, come play." The words stretched unnaturally, drawn out and distorted. Her trembling legs forced her down the stairs, though every fiber of her being screamed to run the other way. The TV flickered as she entered the living room. The screen glowed with static, but behind the snowy distortion, shapes moved. She squinted. At first they were faint, two small figures standing side by side. Tommy and Ryan! Her heart leapt. "Tommy! Boys!" she cried, stumbling toward the screen. Their pale faces stared at her from the other side, lips pressed into weak smiles. But something was wrong. Their eyes, dark, hollow sockets, empty as caves. And behind them, towering in the static, was the clown doll. Its painted grin loomed larger than ever, stretching impossibly wide across its porcelain face. One long, gloved hand rested on each boy's shoulder, holding them firmly in place. Samara screamed, slamming the power button on the remote. The TV clicked off. The room plunged into darkness. For a moment, she thought it was over. But then, slowly, the television screen began to glow again. Without power, without signal. The image returned, brighter this time. Now it showed her. She was standing in the living room, staring into the television. The reflection was perfect, except for one detail. In the image, the clown doll stood behind her, its head tilted, its grin impossibly wide. Samara spun around. The room was empty. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the carpet. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know how much longer she could take this. She needed to get the children. She needed to leave this house. As she crawled toward the front door, her phone buzzed again on the floor where she had dropped it. She hesitated, then snatched it up, her hands shaking. A new message glowed on the screen. It was a photo. Her heart nearly stopped when she opened it. It was a picture of her, kneeling on the living room carpet, holding her phone exactly as she was right now. But behind her, just over her shoulder, stood Tommy and Ryan. Their faces were pale, their eyes smeared with black paint like hollow clown sockets. And between them, crouching low, was the clown doll. Its grin stretched wider than any human face could manage. Samara dropped the phone, her scream shattering the silence. And in that scream, she heard it. The faint, wet sound of breathing, rising again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the TV. It was coming from right under the stairs. The wet sound of breathing grew louder, echoing from the shadows beneath the staircase. Samara froze where she crouched, her nails digging into the carpet. Her heart slammed against her ribs, each beat sharp and painful, as though her body was screaming at her to flee. But her legs felt locked, cemented to the floor. She dared a glance toward the dark space under the stairs. The shadows seemed thicker there, almost alive, writhing and pulsing as if something was crawling inside them. And then, from that suffocating blackness, came a sound she would never forget. The scrape of porcelain dragging slowly against wood. Her stomach twisted. The closet upstairs, the tapping fingers, it hadn't stayed there. Whatever it was here with her. "Boys?" she whispered, though she knew it was foolish. Her voice trembled in the silence. "Tommy? Ryan? Are you there?" A laugh answered her. High-pitched, childlike, but warped, too shrill, stretched unnaturally long. Then, layered beneath it, came more laughter. 2, 3, 4 voices, until the air was filled with a chorus of giggles that didn't belong to any living child. Samara scrambled to her feet, panic surging. She bolted for the front door, clutching the knob with slippery hands. It wouldn't turn. She yanked, twisted, screamed, but the lock stayed stubborn. The metal was ice cold, biting into her skin. Behind her, the television flickered to life again. The static swelled, filling the room with a low, pulsating hum. Against her will, her eyes darted to the screen. Her blood turned to ice. The TV showed her standing at the door, exactly as she was now, fingers clawing at the knob, hair wild, eyes wide with terror. But in the reflection, something loomed behind her. The clown doll. Its head was tilted, its painted smile grotesquely wide. Slowly,
It lifted a finger and pressed it to its lips. Shh. She spun around, her chest heaving, her vision blurred with tears. The living room looked empty, but the air pressed thick against her skin, charged with a suffocating presence. "Leave me alone!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The laughter stopped. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Then, from upstairs, came the unmistakable sound of children's voices, soft, sweet, calling in unison. "Samara!" Her breath hitched. The voices were her boys, Tommy and Ryan. They're alive. She had to save them. Without thinking, she dashed toward the staircase, her feet pounding against the steps as she climbed. The hallway light at the top flickered violently, shadows jerking across the walls like skeletal arms. The children's bedroom door stood wide open, swaying slightly as though moved by an unseen breeze. Inside, the nightlight glowed weakly, but the room was darker than before, the shadows too deep, swallowing the corners whole. "Tommy? Ryan?" she whispered, stepping inside. Both beds were still empty, sheets untouched. But from the closet came the sound of muffled sobbing. Samara's chest ached with hope. She rushed forward, grabbing the handle and yanking it open. The closet was empty, except for the clown doll. It sat upright on the floor, its hands neatly folded on its lap, its painted grin wide and glistening. But this time, its glass eyes were wet, as if real tears had streaked down its porcelain cheeks. Samara stumbled back, her horror searing her chest. The sobbing continued, but it wasn't coming from the closet anymore. It was behind her. She spun around. In the dim glow of the nightlight, two small figures stood side by side. Tommy and Ryan. At least they looked like Tommy and Ryan, but their skin was pale as paper, their lips painted into wide, grotesque red smiles. Black paint circled their hollow eyes, smeared like dripping ink. "Play with us," they whispered in unison. Their voices were flat, emotionless, wrong. Samara shook her head, tears blinding her. No, this isn't real. You're not my boys." They tilted their heads in perfect unison, their smiles stretching impossibly wide. "We are now." From the corner of the room, the clown doll stood, slowly. Its limbs creaked, porcelain grinding against itself as it rose to its feet. It towered taller than it should have been, its painted grin cracking wider across its face. Each step it took echoed with a wet thud, though its feet were porcelain. Samara backed into the wall, her breath ragged. She pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Stay away from me." The doll lifted one porcelain finger and pointed directly at her. The children, or whatever wore their faces, moved closer, their eyes hollow voids. They reached out their pale hands, grabbing her arms with unnatural strength. Their touch burned cold, seeping into her veins. She screamed, thrashing, but their grip tightened, dragging her toward the center of the room. The clown doll leaned down, its face inches from hers. Up close, its grin was a cavern, teeth jagged, endless. Its breath smelled of rot and dust. "Thank you," it whispered, voice like shattered glass, "for letting us in." Her final scream was swallowed by the dark. When the Peters returned at 1 a.m., the house was silent. They unlocked the front door easily, stepping inside with laughter from their evening still lingering on their lips. "Samara?" Mrs. Peter called softly.
"We're home." No answer. Upstairs, the boys lay in their beds, sleeping peacefully, as though nothing had happened. Between them sat the clown doll, its porcelain head tilted, its grin stretching wide beneath the pale glow of the moonlight. Samara was never seen again.